Today's topic is one that I've oddly enough never addressed, and it's Shield of Regrowth. This item has recently seen a spike in popularity after being built a few times at the Smite World Championship. Before we get into the gods that make use of it and which ones can make probably better use than others and how exactly it's applied in different gods, let's go over the stats of the item first. So, Shield of Regrowth is a physical god only item. It has 30 physical power, hence the restriction to physical gods only. It has 30 physical protection. It has a 10% cooldown reduction and a very interesting passive. After healing yourself from an ability, you gain 35% movement speed for 4 seconds. This cannot occur more than once every 10 seconds. The item costs 1,800 gold, so it's very much in the department of cheap items, which makes it a solid early game pickup for some gods, or something that can be fit into a build at a later point with not too much of a downside due to being so cheap. The stats of the item are pretty great. If you look at, for example, Void Shield in comparison, you pay 900 gold more for 10 physical protection over what Shield of Regrowth has, and a 20 physical protection reduction, which is a great stat. Don't get me wrong, but it's something that could be weighed against 10% cooldown reduction and a unique passive on certain gods that can make use of the passive. Another item that would be closer in price would be something like Winged Blade, also an item with some offensive stats with the attack speed, some defensive stats, and some added utility, specifically countering slows here and giving you extra movement speed that way. Winged Blade is a more frequent pickup simply because it's not dependent on your own abilities, but rather the enemy's abilities, so it's more of a counter choice. Shield of Regrowth is not a counter choice at all. The only thing that it counters is physical damage, and also not to the greatest extent here. 30 physical protection is not crazy by any means. What it does better than anything else is giving you an unexpected boost in a chase when you have healing abilities. Now, this is very situational, this is conditional, and depending on how your healing ability works, this may work better or worse for you. And that's why we're gonna look at certain gods individually and talk about how it fits into their kits. I've tried to look up all the physical gods that have some sort of healing that can make some sort of use of this, and we'll go over them one by one, starting with the less efficient ones and then working our way up to the most efficient ones. What's important to note here is that the efficiency is not only dependent on how the character's heal works. What's also important is how much benefit that character gets out of the stats of the item. Certain gods don't make too much use of protection, others don't make too much use of raw power, others don't need cooldown reduction too much. So depending on those factors, I will rate some gods higher than others. Let's begin. The absolute low trash tier in this regard is Ratatoskr, and this is because the heal of his acorn does not proc Shield of Regrowth. It's considered an item healing, and that's why it doesn't count towards his abilities, so it doesn't work. The stats are still nice for him, but if you don't get the passive, it's not really worth getting the item. The next tier consists of gods where I would really not buy the item on. Erlang Shen, Kali, Sun Wukong, and Nemesis. With Nemesis, I'm not even 100% sure if the healing from a shield procs it, but either way, I wouldn't build it. Erlang Shen only really gets his healing off when his ultimate is over, and by that time, you're rarely gonna need movement speed. Either you got out or you got the kill. The fight is over, so there's no point in having that extra movement speed, and it's only on his ultimate. A similar case can be made for Kali. She only gets the movement speed when you get a kill or when you use your leap offensively, which you usually don't. She doesn't make too much use of the stats, which is more important in her case. I honestly would build Bloodforge over this item on her, and that's a rare case for me to say because I usually don't like Bloodforge, simply because it gives similar benefits in that regard and it's just better for a hyper carry instead of a defensive cheap item. Sun Wukong only gets it in his ultimate once again, and while in his ultimate he's up in the air anyway, so the proc's gonna run out while he's in air. What's that gonna be good for? Nemesis, like I said, I'm not even sure if it procs. If it does, it would only be on the shield, which you will usually use to attack cancel or to reflect damage onto someone and try to kill him that way. Movement speed doesn't do much for you there. Also, it's not reliable to get it off because you might not get hit by something, stuff like that, so yeah, never mind that. And that brings us to the more interesting characters. I will call this one the low tier gods for Shield of Regrowth. They do have some uses for it, but they don't seem to be ideal. The First one are 3 characters actually, Chiron, Neith, and Cupid. Chiron maybe a little less than the others because he generally works with that mobility quite well, but with all 3 cases it's the same thing. They are hunters. Hunters are more towards hyper carries, and as such they don't make too much use of defensive stats. Those are ability-based hunters, so they all kind of make decent use of the power and even the cooldown reduction. So I wouldn't completely rate this item out. I don't see any build where it's currently viable to build this item, but with changes to other items, we may very well see it being picked up. If you remember, once upon a time, there was a hunter build with Shifter's Shield at the start. Shield of Regrowth is significantly cheaper and still gives you similar benefits in some regards, so it is something that could theoretically show up at some point, and I wouldn't be completely surprised if it did. But it would require a completely new build where it really finds its function, and until that happens, I would say I wouldn't rate them very high in terms of the benefit they get out of this, simply because hunters usually kill you from range anyways, and they don't really need that movement speed all too often. Then we have Bakasura. Bakasura would in theory make great use of the extra movement speed. That is his thing, sticking to people, and he could get it via his Eat minion. Problem is, the stats on the item really don't do much for him. He doesn't benefit much from raw power. He gets a lot more out of attack speed due to 3 being true damage. He generally doesn't make much use out of cooldown reduction either. So there's a defense, but even that's not that great for him as a hyper carry. And that leaves the item's stats outside of the passive not being all that great for him. There are Tyr and Hercules. Both of them don't really make too much use of the item. And this is because they have ability combos that they usually chain in one swift chain. And then, well, either the enemy is dead or he's not, but you're not going to run around and slap them for extended periods of time. They go through their 1-2 combo, whatever, then maybe swap stance if you're Tyr, but you're not going to have extra movement speed to do all that, and your abilities are not going to be faster or anything. So really the benefit for maybe 1 or 2 basic attack swings is minimal, despite of the stats otherwise being decent for both characters. You could build it. I wouldn't say it's complete trash, but I really don't see much of a benefit in it, especially when for Tyr it only happens at the end of his usual combo, so you get the movement speed after everything else is already done. Also, most of the time, especially Tyr doesn't have a problem sticking to characters either way, and doesn't really need the extra movement speed for that. Raven is kind of in the same boat as well. In his case, the stats once again are great, but he gets his heal through his 3, and when you use the 3, then you have the enemy locked down already. So what are you going to need movement speed for? You have a slow on your 1, you have the lockdown on your 3, you have the 2 which basically accelerates you as well, and you have an ultimate to stick to a target. What are you going to do with movement speed? The last one in this category is a little more debatable, and it's Chaac. Now I understand that Chaac can make some use out of movement speed. For me, my main gripe with this is that Chaac slows the enemy already. And it's a strong slow. The slow should mean that the enemy is not getting away from him when he's healing. So why would I need extra movement speed? Yes, maybe if you drop out the slow to somewhere else and then catch up with your healing moving towards them, and then basically getting them from your X slow into your own body slow, so to speak. There is a point to it, but those scenarios are kind of limited. And once again, Chaac is more of an ability-based character, so he's not going to slap you down for an extended period of time either way, and doesn't make that much use of the movement speed. I'd still say he makes more use of it than the other characters named before, but not enough to be in the next tier. And that brings us to the next tier. Here I would say these are the characters that make okay use of it, like the mid-tier characters. There is Vamana. Vamana only procs it with his ultimate, so it's not crazy good, and he could easily drop down to the next category as well. He's more of a debatable case. He does make great use of the stats, and the nice thing for him is that it procs in his ultimate. And if you play Vamana, you know that in his ultimate he has some problems sticking to people, catching up to people, which is why you usually build either Frostbound or Hasten Fatalis quite often. And Shield of Regrowth can kind of replace that, giving you some more beneficial stats for yourself in certain situations, and giving you a little bit of movement speed. Problem is, if the duration of your ultimate is extended, the shield won't be. It will still be 4 seconds and then it's over. So you will not have the same benefit as Frostbound or Hasten would, but it can be a decent item. Similar case with Guan Yu, could also easily drop down. With Guan Yu, I really like the stats for him. He really likes cooldown reduction of any sort, and being able to get closer to your allies faster can sometimes help a little bit, but usually it's not that great either. It can be okay for certain initiates, but once again, more towards the fact that the other stats on the item are great for him and it's cheap, and the passive being a bonus for him than the other way around. Another warrior is here, and that is Amaterasu. Now I know that Amaterasu is ultra fun with this item, don't get me wrong, but I would debate the viability unless you're against a physical comp and you need some quick physical defense, simply because the extra movement speed on her is usually not needed. Between boots and her passive, she is fast enough. She has her dash, which is also really good, so she really won't need the extra mobility in most cases. And as such, I don't see too much of a point in building it for the passive. Like I said, the other sets are nice, it's cheap, so it's justifiable to build it, but she's not one of those who makes the greatest benefit out of having a little bit extra movement speed on top of all that extra movement speed she already has. Which is different for other gods, by the way. There is also Arachne in this category. Arachne, I know, is more of a debatable case. I know that some people really like this item on her, but I still think that while the movement speed is nice and she doesn't have the highest, well, mobility abilities in herself rather, she has her slow and movement speed increase through the web. And for most scenarios, that is simply enough. You do not need more than the web. You're going to catch up to an enemy, you're going to stun them, and you're going to most likely kill them that way. The reason to build it on her, for me, would be falling behind, so you need some extra mobility to get out and stuff like that. But then again, if you fall behind as Arachne, you usually have a problem already. You're usually in a really bad spot, so that shouldn't really happen in the first place. And that brings us to the gods where I would say this item is good, if not great. Starting with Bellona, one of the cases where I wasn't actually aware that it worked until today. And what happens here is that when you hit the third hit of your Scourge, and you get healed, the heal procs the Shield of Regrowth. And as the stats in themselves are great for Bellona, the physical defense, power, and cooldown reduction are great, and you have a very easy time proccing, allowing you to stick to enemies longer by continually slapping them with your Scourge, I think this is a great item for her, and I think it is actually underrated compared to other gods here, simply because I personally wasn't even aware of it, and I feel like a lot of other people might not be aware of it either. I thought that because it's such a conditional heal, it doesn't count in that case, but it does. So, if you use the Scourge, you stick to enemies longer, basically the same purpose as Frostbound Hammer, but the stats overall I feel are a little more beneficial to Bellona. Similar rankings I would give to Ne Zha in terms of the performance with this item. Ne Zha makes great use of all the stats on this item, no doubt about that. He likes to go in deep and he doesn't have the same amount of escapes as others do, so a little bit of defense goes a long way for him. He has a self-heal that he can use whenever he wants, he can proc the shield whenever he wants, and that way maybe get out of a bad situation, and also the extra damage and everything is nice for him. Cooldown reduction is always great on Ne Zha, so, well, not much to argue there really, and sticking power helps because his basic attacks actually hit very hard. And that brings us to the last two gods, which I would probably consider the top tier gods for this item. One of them is Camazotz. With Camazotz, the great thing here is that often enough you will not even need to use any sort of ability to proc Shield of Regrowth. You can simply walk into any of the pools on the map that are created by a player dying, and you will proc the shield, allowing you to rotate around the map very, very fast, allowing you to chase enemies in unexpected scenarios. But if that doesn't work for you, you can still use your 2, heal up that way, get it that way, or you can use your 3, heal up that way, get it that way. So there are plenty of options to accelerate your movement towards the enemy and aggress on them. Now, Camazotz is not the best auto-attacker. He does have decent auto-attacks. He's still an assassin after all, and his auto-attacks hit hard, but others just do better with that. But overall, I think it's worth considering this item on him in many scenarios. I know that even the pros don't always build it. They decide depending on the game. For example, Variety built it in one game and didn't build it in the other. So, yeah, it's a very good item for him, but it's not a core item, a mandatory core item rather. And the last god on the list, if you haven't guessed it yet, is Thanatos. Thanatos makes excellent use of this item because his ability combo usually allows him to get enemies quite low, and then he can use his 2 to chase them down. And if he gets the extra movement speed from Shield of Regrowth, or his 2 ran out and he gets the movement speed afterwards, this is just an amazing item, giving him that chance to hit the enemy 2 more times maybe, so he is low enough for the execute threshold, or kill them that way if they are below threshold but he doesn't have his ult, stuff like that. So amazing item for him overall. All the stats help him. A little bit of defense once again is great for him as well. I would say Thana is probably the best god for this item, but he's by far not the only one. And with that, I hope I gave you a decent overview of how this item functions, how good it is on certain characters. Sorry this video got so long, I did not realize it's gonna take so much time to cover this. Thank you guys for watching, just casually throwing this out there. I'll be streaming today when you're watching this maybe, and tomorrow for the patch notes, so feel free to stop by. SLOTH, out!